Yeah, I moved to a new guest house for a couple of reasons. This one is just overall much better. For example, to get your bags up instead of hauling it up, they have a winch that hauls it up, which is smart. And the room is on the 4th floor. That's only negative, which means it's really on the 5th. But this is the room, about the same size as the last one, except that it's much nicer looking, and the whole place is far, far better maintained. In the other place, the old antique, wasn't even that, it was just a cheap old towel rack, fell off because it had been loose anyway, but it just fell out of the wall. Then they repaired it. The sink has already come about an inch away, which means it's not going to be long before it literally will fall off the wall like the one did in Chiang Mai. Also, the television didn't work because the cable had been cut, and they tried to jerry-rig it and left it like that. The irony is, as a consequence, that's one of the reasons I decided to leave, because I'm going to spend several days here at the end here, where I'm just kind of like killing time a bit. So it means I'll probably be watching some CNBC stock news, and I couldn't, there was no good reception. It was just snow. And irony is, when I got back from my trip, they had fixed it. But by then I'd made the decision to move and had already made a new arrangement. It's interesting how absolutely counterproductive and self-destructive are their theories. For example, in the Kim's, which is advertised in Lonely Planet, I found a room that I was going to take, but when I tried to shower, the little knob that comes up that allows the water to go up through the shower was gone, and it could not be activated by hand. They had left it like that. No one had bothered to notice it, although they should have a system for having the people who clean notice it. And as a consequence, they lost, at the time, would have been almost 7 or 8 days worth of income. And as a consequence, they got nothing. Whether they'll decide to fix it or not, who knows? But you can't use the shower. This is how self-destructive they are in the way they think about saving money, even to their own destruction. It's a Tuesday before I leave, and I'm now at the History Museum, having taken the taxi cab driver that I had to show how to get here. Even after he figured out where it was I was trying to get to, I had to show him how to get here. Unbelievable. What's interesting about this panel on the front is the similarity of the concept to what was seen at Angkor Wat and other places in the use of the wall panels for the restatement of history. Okay, now we're inside the Museum of Vietnamese History in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, established in 1979. Its primary purpose since its foundation is introducing Vietnamese history and culture to Vietnamese people and foreigners. At some point in time, it was apparently expanded to form a new system of exhibition reflecting both the characteristics of national history and culture and typical cultural features of southern provinces and Asian countries. So there are two main display sections in the museum. And we'll go into the first one here, which displays the Vietnamese history from the primitive period, 500,000 years ago, until the Jin Dynasty, 1945. And then I'll deal with the second part a little bit later. But we'll be looking at prehistoric period, the Metal Age, about 3000 BC to about 200 BC. Chinese domination period, this I think was almost 1,000 years, yeah. From roughly 179 BC to 938. Now, when you think of this, put this in the context of the European situation. About 1000 AD, you were just about in the middle of what's called the Dark Ages, which puts you in the real, just at the end of the really what we call the Dark Ages. We're just about ready to start to move out of that period towards the medieval and towards the Renaissance. And so then we'll be looking at the next period, which was from about 1000 AD to 1225, then 1226, the Ho Dynasty, to 1407. Remember, You could argue that the Renaissance started in 1401 with Ghiberti and my brain can't shift from one history to another. Then the Champa culture of the 17th century, which were the Cham people that we visited on the last day of the 3-day tour. And then the last several dynasties there that brought us up to 1945, the Nujin dynasty, however you pronounce it. So we'll look first at this first prehistoric period, and I'm anxious to see what's 500,000 years ago. Then we'll go to number 2, Metal Age, and the Chinese domination period. It has to be one of the most influential periods. These are Buddhas. These are wood sculptures dating from around the 18th century. We can recognize some of these characters from what we've seen before. Particularly I noticed, I think, this old man from the Ramayana panels that we've seen. Most of those were wood, and this also is wood from 1908. I'm going to make no attempt to document everything in here because that would be silly, but I will try to look at some things that intrigue me. Apparently this was found in an old shipwreck, which of course, with modern techniques for going down into deep water and for finding things in water buried under mud, more and more artifacts from all cultures are being discovered in shipwrecks. Some pretty ceremonial candle holders of elephants. Here's some Buddhas sitting on the 3 coils of cobra, but lacking for some reason the cobra head behind it. These various containers, I don't know what they're for or when they were made. But look at the interesting detailed carving in this wooden box, which I assume both of these are all of one piece. Okay, here a fossil of a fish that's reputed to be 1 million years, no. Here a fossil of a fish 65 million years old, but look at the detail in the scales. Now, with some of our techniques for detecting DNA, would it even be possible? Most of these artifacts of what look like chisels or small stone axes go back about, according to this, about 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 to 4,000 years ago. They look like they're made out of a relatively soft stone, probably because they didn't have really very hard stone to work with except for these. I'm not sure what that is. Now, some of this jewelry dates back as much as 2,500 years ago, but the silver, of course, is certainly much newer. These look like pieces for holding hair. Since I've got a shadow, I'll move the camera within the shadow so you can see better detail there. One of the things we've expected, although it's not unseen in the Western world, is the incredible high detail quality of Eastern work. Stick pins of some sort, but with very beautiful little birds. Imagine this being owned by an elegant woman, perhaps, in her time and context. I don't know what these 2 devices are. They have holes like a flute would have, but I don't think that's what that is, or too many holes. These are early 19th century, or 20th century, to early 1900s, if you will. Rather than wallow in the detail of this, I'll just pan through it slowly. And then I'm going to come back and focus on a couple that are particularly intriguing. Not to mention that giant one there. Looks like a ceramic glaze. Just imagine the technology or the context in which that was glazed. This is one of 2 apparently matched vessels. beautiful vessel here. Let's look really closely at it. Without knowing for sure, I would assume that these are drums made out of a relatively thin metal. You can see that how thin it is in that broken portion there. You can also notice a lot of the detail that's been wrought into these, more so on the top than on the sides. These must have been beautiful at one time if they, from the green color, were copper. Finely polished perhaps. I'm up close and personal to a vessel, or a candle stand actually is what I think it is. It's probably just short of 5.5 feet. I'm scooting down here so I can give a little more focus to the base. Here are a couple of what look like clay tablets, but maybe more likely clay decorative tablets, mosaics, or decorative wall pieces or something. This is a 15th century ceramic. Remember, the Chinese in particular have been extremely revered for their ceramics, particularly in the early years. So this culture, their culture, would have naturally transferred here during that 1,000-year period, which I think that includes. I'm guessing that to do some sloppy historical comparison, we might compare the Chinese period and its influence to that of perhaps the Greek or the Romans, or the combination of the two on Europe. This is a 13th century terracotta. What it would have been used for, don't know. Attached to a wall, a shrine, perhaps. We're not supposed to take pictures, but I see everybody doing it, even while the guard stands there and watches. So I challenged him on it, and he stopped it. So I'm just going to take pictures of what I want and let them tell me to have to stop. Here's some very large of that blue and white style. Here's a very elegant piece. Look at the beautiful detail of this. And of this beautiful little, perhaps it's a dish, but you wouldn't think so. Here a mummy, but I don't know of what. That yellowed handle, just imagine the use it may have received to get that yellow, if I'm not fantasizing too much. Here the four-faced avatar, I think of Shiva. Look at the top knots, how different that is. If this is in fact a Vietnamese Buddha, and I don't know if it is. All of this is just a brief allusion to and reference of Angkor Wat. And in response to the signs for not using photography, they're flashing all over. Here are a couple of large, beautiful vessels. How beautiful these are, aren't they? This one in particular, because the colors give a realism you don't see when it's just one or two colors of a specific style. Maybe, I don't know. So this is actually a pan flute. There are several flutes here. And here an old traditional plucking violin type or cello type of instrument. Notice the tortoise shell. And here's some weapons and shields. Now we're in the Aboriginal room now. Lovely reed basket. Believe it or not, this was an early ginning tool for cotton, i.e. a cotton gin. And here's some either weapons or farming tools. It's a little confused. These look like weapons, but I think these are farming tools, like a seed punch there, and a little hoe, but notice how close to the ground you're working with this stuff. That looks like a bow and a quiver and fishing. And here's some very old small weirs. This basket is used for gathering rice once they've laid it out to dry on a flat surface. See the same thing today. And here a beautiful old wood boat carved from a single piece of wood. And this we recognize, of course. There's some early stone implements. Very, very rough ones. These are the ones that date from 500,000 years. Looking at these, it's hard to imagine that they can be identified as used by man, but certainly there must be scratches or gouges that indicate having been worked and or using thing with these. But these are late Paleolithic, 30 to 23,000 years ago, and they look more worked. But this over here doesn't look worked at all. It's certainly not these. A little bit more advanced. Shells used as tools easily enough for gouging and so forth. These almost look like the striations you get off of a beach, preserved in stone, which they may well be. Here a monumental piece probably came out of a temple somewhere with that beautiful carving and the reverential elephant tusks. Those look like bullets, but they call them pellets, and this is supposed to be from the Hong primitive period, or the metal period of 4,000 to 2,000 years ago. That's curious. This also looks a little bit too finely worked, that groove on the inside of that circle there. These look like stones that might have been used for sharpeners. That's correct, they're grindstones. Here's certainly some rough metal worked. And you can see how they had holes there for installing something into some wood of some sort, fashioned as a handle. You wonder if these are weapons or farming tools. These are plowshares. No doubt about these from 2,500 years ago. Notice the similar fashion that you get with European type of weapons. Again, the knife design seems to be something that man can simultaneously develop in any culture. This is a 2,500-year-old ladle that looks like someone banging on a gong, perhaps. This is actually a boat-shaped coffin in which hundreds of brass and copper implements were found, which would suggest that it was a very important person. And this, a large jar-shaped coffin, bronze bell. Here, notice you can see the mark where the square part was carved out subsequent to its molding. And these look to have some kind of material on their surface, like the residual of a paint or a ceramic coloring. These were probably little amulets that you carried around your neck, wore around your neck. They're a set of bells. Here's some very pretty jewelry, simple, but must have taken quite a bit of effort to carve out all those little spheres and then put a hole through. Another jar-shaped coffin, which you might easily have guessed was a container for, let's say, water. Here, a wicked-looking end of a pike. Perhaps the one kind of thing carried on the elephant. Here's a skull remain, in situ almost, with a jade earring. But look at the teeth. Doesn't it look like that upper jaw protrudes forward quite a bit? But also the similarity we see in looking at someone else's teeth from thousands of years ago, perhaps. 2,500 years ago to be exact. Here a display of a famous battle from 938 on the Mekong River. Remember, this was just at the end of the Chinese domination period. In fact, this may symbolize the end. Looking at these implements of war are a reflection of the remnant of a 1,000-year struggle to remove the Chinese from Vietnam, which was finalized 938. But just imagine that all that remains a few thousand years from, or another 1,000 years from now, are a couple of nuclear warhead shells, some dusty museum. This is kind of cute. It's a terracotta model of a home site, including a couple of a rather large duck or goose. This map just quickly defines where the major struggles or battles were to expel the Chinese in that 1,000-year period. Pretty but simple. Probably a water or wine vessel. We're a second millennium artifact. Looks like a goose. 12th century terracotta figurines. These would have probably been richly colored. Terracotta bricks from the 12th century with probably the manufacturer's marking or symbol on them, just like brickmakers of recent times have done. These more elaborate, so they might have been bricks that were more decorative than simply his signature or her signature. In Bac Din at 1077, this is a defensive line on the Kaw River side, displaying a battle. Something like this was used by Bruce Wallace in Scotland at Stirling Bridge. Although I think, yeah, it was. But it was used to force in, I think, the outside cavalry into the center line. These are actual posts that were placed in the riverbed to destroy unsuspecting Mongol boats or ships, equivalent of our mines. Apparently fire was a pretty successful tool also. Some 13th century terracottas. This probably a naga, a snakehead. It looks like it's either devouring another snake or has a ball in its mouth, or and here a bird-like god or demon, I think, that I was reading about yesterday. Except this is called a phoenix head. Remember that the use of devil-like and monster-like faces is very typical in European furniture as well as architecture. Gargoyles, for example. This is a loudspeaker that would be used to advise troops to move certain ways. And here in this diorama from a slight hilltop we can see in the Battle of Van Keep, the use of a similar device. This is the first time I've seen this, and it's very interesting. It's a map of the Mongol invasion, if you will, of not only Asia, but of Europe. A Roman looking as this. But not. Notice the snakes intertwined their tails. This might have been a Buddha in a warrior mode or something. Notice the remnants of snakes wrapped around his arm, or shoulders rather. Here the model of a linga. Notice how polished it is. Maybe people symbolically touched it for some reason. This may be Shiva with the snakes wrapped around. Or it may be some other. These are dancers, so they may be asaras, or asperas. This is a roof ornament, or what we would call a gargoyle. And I think that it may be that seven-headed cobra. So apparently what we're looking at here are architectural features from temples of the Cham dynasty that ruled here. And remember, the Thai were in apparently constant state of battle with these people. But there's no escaping the connection to the Indian Ramayana, Hindu faith, the Brahma. They're an extremely well preserved bird, man, avatar or demon that I was reading about. But look at the fine detail. And here another, the monkey man. I could go back in the book and find out precisely what this was. When I look at the inscription, it calls it a lion, so I'm reading this wrong. And this bird man is a Garuda. And this is Shiva rather than a Buddha, which accounts for that different kind of a hat, if you will. Apparently this represents a transition from the realism in sculpture to a more stylized version, in which these kinds of sculptures ultimately became stelae of very abstract nature. You can see the potential for that here. And here another Garuda, the bird, man, beast, backdropped by the Naga, here with just 5 heads. These are some kind of pottery axes. Polishers, design printers, as we can see there. Number 4 is a pounder for pounding the clay and working it preparatory to making something. Now these are apparently pendant sharpeners, or whatever that means. And maybe that's a sharpener there. See the lines crisscrossing on it? We can only begin to imagine how these were used. And these are pretty lids for these vessels.
In this room, you see many.
These are molds for making probably these little pendants or earrings. This is very fun because you get to see what was made and how it was made. Probably for holding something like something bigger than chopsticks, I would imagine, but for resting it on there. This, believe it or not, may have been a mirror, highly polished. These are dramatic examples and realistic examples of the linga or male penis from this culture, far more so than we saw at either Angkor Wat or elsewhere. And these also included the carving of the king. This wooden carving is apparently 6,000 years old, carved from one tree. It's impressive that this still exists after this much time. Here, what is obvious is stelae, as are these. The literature suggests that these were often changed. In other words, they'd be excised out and the next ruler would put in what he wanted to say. I don't know if this represented the revising of history or not. Now there was a third part to the linga. The male part, then the second part, which is to the left here, but we see it underneath the linga as it was properly positioned. But there was still a third element that was underground. So I won't try and wallow in this, I'll just make a sweep of it. But we do want to pause to look at the eight-handed or multi-handed Buddha here. Here, dramatically multi-handed, probably reflecting the various forms that the Buddha could take. Now notice in this instance that this Buddha has 4 heads. You can't see the 4th behind him. And then multiple heads on top. Tremendous amount of symbolism in here. And what would normally be the Naga with 7 heads, I'm guessing that this may be I was going to say that these protrusions might represent many Naga, but in fact they represent many hands. And this probably then is a reflection of the many capabilities that Shiva has in any one of its forms. Here is 16th to 18th century Thailand reclining Buddha, of which I've seen several of the full size. I mean, like maybe 100 feet long. Notice the dramatically elongated fingers. Notice the absence of bone structure in, for example, the elbow. There is none. This is a diorama of the Shilang Pass, Lang Song province, where Lang Song insurgents began a campaign to annihilate 100,000 Ming aggressors. What is surprising that they could get away with such an obvious tactical ploy, and that is to be trapped in a defile without having sent scouts along in these upper areas to see if there was anything there. This is so classic as almost to be a cliche. Here we can see, notice the hats, the conical hats that we see in Vietnam even today, versus the opponents, which have those funny-looking hats, funnier looking. And the Ming aggressor period was 1407 to 1413. A very pretty, probably a candle pedestal, although it looks like a vase or vase. Examples of incense burners, or places where you put the incense, you can see here. Oh no, maybe not. Maybe it's for drinking. These are called hubble bubble pipes. So I'm not clear what these things are for, and it's not clear to me here. So I can't figure out what that little tool is for. Here a post of 30,000 Ming or king aggressors was destroyed, but notice the battle technique here of a large board or portable wall that could protect the infantry. That's kind of novel. I've never heard of that. But it's not quite an infantry in that they're carrying spears rather than something like swords. But you can get the point of how it would have been used. It's interesting to see how the elephants would be used, how intimidating they would be. Notice this one elephant over here that has an aggressor in his trunk. Look at how sharp the tusks are. These, again, these old dioramas give us a little bit of a sense of history. They may still be the one thing that records it. And is this a cannon here? Or was this one of those loudspeakers? And here where Tai Song insurgents broke 50,000 Siamese or Thailand aggressors, 1785. here people are using bow and arrows. In fact, crossbows is what that one there looks like, plus cannon. See the ship's sails catching on fire. And this is where it got nasty. This is fascinating, almost personal cannon, if you will. I've never seen cannon this size. They almost look like bazookas, but they don't appear to be hollow all the way through. Here we get some mighty big versions. These are some of the biggest steel or iron cannons I've ever seen. I would think these have to reflect the European influence. And these are very beautiful I was just in the gift shop and noticed a figurine that I wanted to buy yesterday in Tron Market. Here it's 200,000. There I got them down to 50,000. Here a pretty carved wooden tray. I'll bet it was something used for cosmetics or maybe for painting, with those two little side bowls, or it may have been used for food, and that was for a couple of condiments. Same thing with this lovely one here. How lovely something like this would be today. Here wrote a gravure, I think, or an etching of our Army battle elephant, although it looks more ceremonial than battle. This is called the examination seat, but I can't determine whether it's for artists who are drawing something or whether it is a criminal situation. I love these kind of etchings. This 1888 of the Quai de Nahong, including what looks like either a bridge or a ferry dock. But this gives you a clue of how people actually lived and what things were really like. People hauling wagons, loads of stuff with oxen, and big European ships sitting off. Here a scene from a theater production. Here an etching of a delegation to France in 1883. And this may be showing us how the small cannon were used. This one being a little bit larger than the ones we just saw, which were probably less than the distance from his arm to the right end. These are early 20th century ceramics, and not a surprise even to Americans, since the motif seems to be quite familiar. In fact, it's quite possible much of what we had then came from China and Vietnam and other Asian countries. This is called a dragon robe from the 1800 to 1945 era. But we look at the beautiful colors and designs, intricate detail of these robes. No surprise that Asia has the beautiful women's clothing that it has. 19th century to 1945 musical instruments, some of which would probably be quite familiar today. Here a model of a temple. If you can see these are models of small cake molds of a small model of a sledge. In other words, we would use this to carry something in it. This, believe it or not, is a fish trap. Exactly how it works, I haven't a clue. Made by other fish traps, or what I would call weirs, W-E-I-R. These are various baskets, probably baskets that a person would either carry their lunch in, or a picnic for the family, or would be used for work, of course. Notice the nifty little design. It may also have been used for picking various fruits. This one for carrying something that went in those two pockets. Beautifully woven baskets. Here a pestle and mortar, big one. They use these still today in making of food, at least smaller ones I've seen. Apparently some typical peasant clothing. Looks pretty warm. But then this is the hot season. There's that cotton gin again.